Hello, everybody. I'm Carol Siegel.
And I'm Sharon Henry Blythe.
And we'd like to welcome you. This is the second in our talks about homelessness. Sharon, could you introduce yourself?
Well, I work for the Family Housing Fund, and my project is called the Visible Child Initiative. And the goal of my work is to support organizations that serve homeless families to increase their understanding and awareness and ability to serve young children that have experienced trauma. So I do a variety of things, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on.
Right. So part of our reasons for doing this series started off as home visiting in the context of trauma. And we've addressed different issues along the way. Our last one was about the practical aspects of being a home visitor for homeless families. Today we're really talking about the larger issues, the largest systemic issues, how we either address and understand that the children and parents have experienced so much trauma, and does that translate into services or not? Mm-hmm. And the what do we do part, which is always, I know, the part that listeners are most interested in. We've all been thinking a lot about the connection between early childhood and adult mental health, challenges in childhood, and how it translates so that our at-risk children become what we call high-risk adults. And anyone who works in home visiting, I think, sees this very dramatically. So today we're going to be trying to put together some of the stuff we know about the research about adverse childhood experiences, how many of the families that we see either in home visiting or if you're doing homeless home visiting, basically everybody. Mm-hmm. And just, so Sharon's point of view is from the direct research with the children.
Yes.
So that's what we're going to be talking about today.
All right. So I'll start out talking about kind of giving us a general idea or understanding of homelessness in Minnesota, and I'm using Wilder. Wilder does a survey across the state of Minnesota every couple of years, and so the most recent survey they did, the data was published. The survey was done in 2012, and the data was published early this year, I believe. So let me give you a general idea of what was learned in that survey. Overall, there are over 10,000 children. The number gets larger if they extrapolate, but so let's just use the data that they came up with. They project that they had about 10,000 people participate in the survey. 6%, there's a 6% increase between 2009 and 2012. That's a fairly slow increase considering there was a 25% increase, as you'll see, between 2006 and 2009. The largest percentage of, and there was a slight increase in family homelessness. Interestingly enough, they found that there was increased percentage of two-parent families that were homeless, and that's a very unusual data point. I've never seen that before. So that was worthy of them, definitely worthy of them reporting.
Did they have any idea why that is, or do you have any idea about that?
What I have learned over the years is that when you look, homelessness and employment statistics kind of follow each other. When you see a change in homelessness, you see an increased change, when you see a change in employment, mm-hmm. like we had for years, you see the homeless rate grow. Mm-hmm. And considering the housing crisis that we had, we think that it is a combination of the housing crisis, people losing their homes, and employment, the difficulty finding employment.
So are you saying that this is all goes back to the recession of 2007, yes. 2008?
Yes.
And when you say housing crisis, do you mean in the Minneapolis area, or do you mean in the larger?
In the larger, across the nation. You know, there could be families that were impacted by the housing crisis in one state and relocated here, or there could be families, you know, there were a lot of families that were renters. They weren't homeowners, but they were renters, and the owner of the property lost their property, and that caused that family to become homeless. So the issues we had with housing market affected low-income families in a variety of ways.
So that's something we don't usually think about. We think about people who couldn't afford their mortgages,
right,
but not the people renting from people who couldn't.
Oh, okay. Exactly. And there was the Family Housing Fund actually facilitated and supported a lot of work in the heat of that housing market problem, the housing market issues that we were having, specifically for renters, because there were so many renters that were becoming homeless because the homeowner lost the property. And the homeowner was continuing in some cases, not all, but in some cases continue to take rent, knowing that they were at risk of losing their housing. So the families were really stuck.
And so then they couldn't save up any money for the next deposit.
Exactly. Exactly.
As far as you know, was there any warning when renters would lose their home or their housing? Was there some system in place that gave people enough time so that they could make arrangements?
No, there was not. Especially in this case with actual loss, a homeowner actually losing, completely
like foreclosure.
losing a foreclosure.
And it happened. Right. Maybe they knew.
They knew, but they weren't necessarily telling their tenants. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was, we think that it has something to do with that. A few of the reasons that were identified in the survey that were considered immediate causes of homelessness, in addition to, I think, the two-parent family issue is a result of the things that we just talked about. But some of the things that the survey identified as immediate causes for homelessness: eviction, financial or other reasons. That would be, I think that would fit under what the discussion we just had. Personal conflicts, breakup with a spouse or a partner. I think in our presentation today we'll talk a little bit about domestic violence being one of the primary causes one of the leading causes of homeless families. Problems getting along with others, drinking or drug problems.
And sometimes I hear from families that they have a hard time saying no to people who want to stay with them.
Yes.
And so it kind of violates the rules.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. That becomes a problem for families once they get settled. That even if they're in supportive housing, a family member will come to spend the night and stay more than a night, and it causes problems even when they're in supportive housing. Yeah.
So can I ask a question that's a little bit farther afield, but I just was thinking about it as you were talking about the financial crisis. When the minimum wage doesn't go up, but rents continue to go up, so do you see that for I don't know if it's for the two-parent families, the one-parent families, but that gap between what they're earning, even if they're fully employed, and the increasing in rent, has that been something that, as far as you know, has been tracked by anybody?
It has been tracked. The Family Housing Fund, I believe, has looked at that data and published a report. I wish I'd pulled some of those reports, a recent report, and it looks at what some kind of minimum wage or a little higher than minimum wage work, what the annual salary is, or what the monthly salary is, and what the average wage, rent is in the metro area. And there is, we know based on that data that there's a significant gap between earnings of low-income families and sometimes not so low-income families, and the cost of housing.
Yeah, and the increase in housing.
And it's a huge gap.
Because I know some of us, in doing home visiting, sometimes we're working with fully employed people who are becoming homeless.
Yes.
And the frustrations with, I don't know, for me, like the internal frustrations, I know I've talked with lots of people, the home visitors, who become frustrated by more like the larger system issues.
Yes.
That people can't afford the housing that they have, even if they're fully employed.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a woman Angela, she does Healthy Start. She's the director of Healthy Start in the city of Minneapolis at the home visiting program.
Oh,
Am I not? Maybe I'm not using the right term, Healthy Start. But it's a home visiting program and it's in the city of Minneapolis. It's a national program, but Minneapolis has one. And she's finding that the staff, one of the primary issues that the staff are confronted with when they're trying to work with families is housing.
Yeah.
So it's the mobility of the families. They can't keep up with them because they're homeless, and so they're moving from place to place.
Which is how we got that title, Homeless and Highly Mobile.
Yes.
It's not necessarily that people are homeless at the time, but that continuity, which we know is so challenging for kids when there's the change in schooling and child care and all that.
Exactly, yeah. So so half of Minnesota children, so the largest percentage of homeless children are 5 and under.
Oh.
And that was also in the 2009 data, and it's in the 2012 data. Wilder has really, with support of the community and some funders, has really taken time to look at the child data that they gather in the surveys that they do every other year. So as you'll see, as you can see from the screen, the 36% are 6 to 12. So it kind of goes 5 and under, 6 to 12, and then adolescents.
So the most vulnerable kids is the largest.
It's the largest group among children. What we do know that adolescent group is a fast-growing group, but they are not the largest group of homeless children. Most children, by and large, the largest percent of children are in the care of their mother or a single female. It might be an auntie or a grandma. Fathers are there. As we said, there's a growing population of two-parent families, so fathers are sometimes present or part of the family, but they're rarely the ones that are solely responsible, like single fathers and homeless. But we do see that, like I said, we do see more two-parent households that are homeless.
You know, that statistic that you're just saying, 1 in 10 are under 1-year-old. We've been spending so much time in the state thinking about what young children need for development and how important stability and regulation and consistency is. And just that statistic alone is enough to should give us serious pause.
And that is the reason why the Family Housing Fund started the Visible Child Initiative, that very thing. And the reality that people see staff, as an example, that work with families, staff in supportive housing, you see the children that are, by the time they get about 6 years old, they're in the hallway, or they're making their presence known. But what the children, they weren't seeing the little ones, the ones that are in the crib or in, kind of in the corner.
In the car seat.
They weren't seeing them in a way they were recognizing that their needs. So that was really the impetus for the Visible Child Initiative.
And one thing we talked about in the last webinar was that the shelters don't have a mental health perspective. They have an educational perspective and a service providing perspective, but the mental health part is something that you've really been working on, trying to make that be more part of the programming, part of how people even think about setting up services.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of my work is in the supportive housing. So supportive housing, most of you probably know this, but I will just kind of describe it quickly. Supportive housing is when that family gets out of shelter and it gets into housing, and they could be stable for 2 years. Supportive housing can be up to 2 years, and sometimes it can be permanent. Shelters are usually a 30-day stay, very short term. The family has to kind of cycle in and out in order to, you got to leave to get back in, and it's very, very, it's a system that we designed many, many years ago to respond to an immediate need, and it's typically based on housing. The homeless community responded to the needs of homeless children and families by duplicating services that were provided to homeless adults.
Yeah.
So shelters were originally designed for homeless adults.
Yeah.
You're not going to, they want to let me out of here. You can't keep me here, kind of cycle in and out. We have the same system in place for families with children, and it is not conducive to the health and well-being of the children or the adults, or the parents in this case. So that's one of the ways that we have a system that is kind of broken.
It's such a great explanation, because one of the things that we discussed last time, but I just have always found peculiar, is the idea that families have to be out of the shelter during the day.
Yes.
Or transported from where they're sleeping to the day program at 6 in the morning.
Yes.
And I've just never understood how that fits, but that explanation that it's adults, designed for adults who don't want to be there.
That's right. That's right. And for the organization to say, you got to get out of here. You can sleep here, but you can't stay all day.
Yep.
We got to see you do something.
Yep.
Well, when you have a 2-year-old and a 9-month-old, that's really not the best service strategy.
And so is that how the day shelter in St. Paul got started, to fill that gap?
Yes.
And do you know much about the services in Greater Minnesota?
I don't know a lot about the services in Greater Minnesota. I wish I did. I'm very interested because, as you'll see from the slide, the homelessness in Greater Minnesota, there is a stark difference between homelessness, or how families that are homeless, what's available to them in Greater Minnesota versus the metro area. Greater Minnesota, most families it's not unusual for a family to move from, to double up, to do a lot more double up, or moving from friends and family, bouncing around, sleeping in cars, or, places that are not supposed to be inhabited by, are not homes for human beings, outdoors camping. And the impact on children, as we know, as you know, we've been talking about a little bit, is just, it's profound. And so Greater Minnesota does not have the shelter, the access to shelter, physical shelter program like we have here in the Twin Cities, or in the metro area, not just in the Twin Cities, but the larger metro area. Homeless families, most homeless families in the metro area can find their way into a shelter. Now, they still have that rotation that they have to deal with. I can only be here for 30 days or 60 days, or whatever the case may be. But there is more access to shelter in the metro area than there is in Greater Minnesota. There are still families in the metro area that can't get into shelter. Hennepin County has a policy that no person will sleep outside. So Hennepin County has alternatives, to try to get people out.
Is that how so many churches got involved with?
Yeah.
So for people in Greater Minnesota, maybe you can just describe how some of the churches have provided services for that gap right there.
Right. So there are some churches that provide, like Carol was saying, a place for families to be during the day, a way for families to have a place to sleep at night. So they can go to a church basement. So churches will, congregations will agree to be a site for a month, or whatever the case may be, where families can come at night and sleep. But it's not a but. That I sound very negative. Thank goodness that these churches, that the faith community has stepped up, because without them, we don't know where we could have many more young children and parents, and just young families altogether die under very difficult circumstances. So
because they're making sure they're not on the street.
They're making sure they're not on the street. They're protected from the elements, and they're protected from others. There's a sense of safety that they have when they can go and sleep in the church basement.
You know, when you said you don't mean to sound negative, I think we as a community can understand that we can be grateful that people do that and that this is not adequate.
Yeah, yeah.
And could you follow up on what you were going to say, but they have to be out by?
But they have to be out, like at, 6 o'clock in the morning. They have to be headed out the door.
Yeah.
So let me use the example in Ramsey County, the family place. So they get up in the morning, they get up at the church, they're woken up, they're in the church basement, they're woken up, they got to get up, get ready, be ready to get out of there by 6 o'clock, go back to the day program, which is, in this case in Ramsey County, is the family place. And then the kids then, the school bus comes to the family place to pick them up. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, you've got a child that is up and sleepy as can be, and just waiting, just laying down, waiting for the bus to come. I mean, their schedules are just off.
They're really off. And we've talked about this last time, too, that the feeding is also off.
Oh, gosh.
Because the feeding is determined by the place.
Yes, yes.
So you might get dinner very early.
Yeah.
4 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then you might not get breakfast until, and if you're at family place, before you go to school.
Right.
I mean,
it's just not, it's not a system that is conducive to healthy, good mental health for children or their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And as Carol was saying, these programs don't have a mental health component. Mm-hmm. And so they have volunteers that come in and do the night shift, so different people will agree to stay with the families overnight. And these folks are not trained to deal with a child that is just and parent, both dysregulated.
Right.
Nobody's regulated.
And it's one of the things we talk about for the role of the home visitor.
Yeah.
If the home visitor, so we all know, right, you guys that are listening, what it's like to show up at a place, either it's a shelter or somebody's home where there's somebody doubling up and the kids aren't dressed, the diapers aren't changed, nobody's fed, and that feeling of, how am I going to do this work?
Yeah.
And that we talk a lot about the just showing up, the regularity that's provided by your visit is one anchor that can happen for the minds of the children.
Oh, gosh,
and we talk about that moment when as you start to come close and you see the little heads in the window and they're getting ready for something regular, something predictable, and how, the research keeps showing us that it's that early regulatory experience that is the long-term protective factor that builds resilience. And I know people keep say to me all the time, can one time a week really make a difference? And we know that children anchor onto the regular experience that they have.
Yes, yes.
And remember, and we prepare them to anchor onto somebody else, like their preschool teacher, once they get there.
Yeah. And Carol, this is what I've been trying to help supportive housing organizations embrace. Mm-hmm. That relationship, when I did the Infantile Discovery Project research, I'll talk about that a little later, that relationship with the case manager is one that is just, the parents identify that as one of the most powerful relationships that they have. Mm-hmm. Now, this is not a long-term relationship, but it's someone that, with the adult, is regular, is consistent, is responsive. If I call you, you will answer. And it's just it's that anchor for that adult. That, whether the staff realize it or not, when they show up in that house, they now become part of an anchor for that child. Yeah. And if leverage that opportunity.
And, it's weird, right? People listening, we go back to this all the time. And I worry sometimes when you hear it that you're thinking, oh, it's the same old stuff again, show up, be regular, be consistent. But as Sharon talks about the larger systems issues, we can get so flooded with how challenging the big picture is, and to remember that you still make a difference. Yes. In the middle of homelessness, in the middle of stress and economic devastation,
Yes.
you can still make a difference.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's visible, right? That's the visible child.
That's the visible child.
Right.
Yes, yes. So I wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about homelessness in Greater Minnesota, because it's different than in the metro area, but the impact on children is the same, no matter whether they're in Greater Minnesota or they're in the metro area. But there are unique aspects of homelessness in Greater Minnesota that I wanted to point out.
Should I go back a bit, or you want to stay?
No. Do we want to see if there are any questions at this point, or should we?
Yeah, so we're doing it a little different. We have to ask Michael if there are any questions.
We don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
Okay. So, now I want to talk a little bit about the trauma, and this is what was, again, I'm using Wilder, the 2012 report from Wilder, to talk about up to this point, through this point. So, in their research, they asked parents, they asked people, the adults that they were interviewing, about experience with trauma, and it became very clear that trauma and, the just trauma, I won't try and add any more words to it, have a profound impact on the lives of, have had a profound impact on the lives of the adults. So I'm going to give you some numbers. 37% of the homeless adults reported being physically abused as children. 26% said they were sexually abused as children. 21% were neglected as children, and that's defined as were not provided with adequate food, shelter, medical care, or were left unsupervised for long periods of time when they were too young to be on their own. We know that domestic violence, as I mentioned earlier, Wilder has pointed out in the last 2 surveys that they've done, domestic violence is one of the leading causes of family homelessness. Chemical dependency, as you all know, these things kind of co-occur. Chemical dependency, domestic violence, mental illness, these things can get all mixed up. But the reason why I wanted to point this out is because the adults that are parenting these young children are bringing such trauma history to their parenting. And so it just changes everything. I mean, we now have in front of us, you have in front of you, an adult that is still in such grief themselves, and they're now not only charged with the job of parenting young children or parenting children, but they're also struggling at a level of survival.
And interesting, we use this term PTSD, which has embedded in it the word post. And when we're working with homeless families, there's no post, to the trauma.
Right.
This is active traumatic stress, ongoing. We don't, for those of you who are mental health clinicians, we know we don't even have a diagnosis in the book that says ongoing active traumatic experience. There is no such thing.
Wow.
It's called post.
Yeah.
And so for us to keep remembering when we're recommending programs or treatment or whatever, the adults and, of course, the children are being subjected to trauma as we speak.
Yes. The one thing, you all as home visitors are, steps ahead of the staff that I work with in terms of having strategies to use in interacting, in serving families that have experienced significant trauma and their children. The frontline staff I work with, they don't come to this work because they're not mental health specialists. They're not early childhood specialists.
Right, and a lot of home visitors aren't either, but they've been doing this. Many people are public health.
Okay.
Come from the maternal child health background, but have learned, I've been eager to learn when thinking about home visiting in the context of trauma, we ignore mental health at our peril.
Oh, okay,
Right?
okay.
Some people have, and what we talk about a lot is home visitors are not expected to be therapists.
Right.
They're not expected to treat trauma. What we're always going back to is what's the impact of trauma on parenting, as you said. Parenting from a traumatic place is really different. And what can you do that isn't going into the trauma, but how you can acknowledge with the parent. An example that I know some of you have heard me say this before, but I'll repeat it for those who haven't, that we think about doing interventions, I've been calling it horizontally rather than vertically, or breadth versus depth.
Yeah.
So when someone says, you know, I can't change my baby's diaper because I was sexually abused as a child, that instead of either refusing to hear that, which I know no one out there would do, or going into the story because as non-therapists that would feel out of your scope.
Right.
But sometimes parents will tell you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But then to stay on the surface with a comment that's something like, I'm so glad you told me, that makes so much sense. Let's figure out what we can do so that you're able to take care of your child the way you want.
Yes, yes.
And how can we structure it so that you feel safe so we can do tons on the, and the word surface sounds pejorative. I don't mean that. I just mean not going into the trauma. But working as a home visitor with people who've experienced so much to develop ways to talk about, I'm so glad you've explained to me, now let's figure out what you can do every day.
Yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
But I think it's really hard. We get caught up in when you and I talk about this stuff, and some of our slides are going to talk about the extent of trauma. And I know people have done ACEs training before, some people in the listening audience. You start to feel like, well, but I'm not a therapist, so what am I going to do with this information?
Yeah.
And I know you're trying to help the frontline staff understand the context.
Yes.
And why they see what they see.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And give them simple, practical strategies that they can use, because, like you said, they have to, and they want to respond when someone says, I can't change my baby because I was sexually abused as a child. But what are the simple ways that they can respond to that? And then move that, bring that parent to that next place that can go deeper with them, because they're not the one.
They're not the one, but they say, it sounds like this has been an ongoing issue for you. Have you considered talking to someone about it?
Yes. I always mention to staff when I do training, I train staff on how to use the ASQSE. So this is a way to get some concrete information about the needs of young children, and so they can develop strategies. That's a way of seeing children. Yeah. And I always tell them, if you're not going to do something, then don't use this tool. Because once you know something, you are obligated to do something.
So I wonder if people listening feel that same way, that sometimes the programs we require that they do certain assessments, but they don't feel like it's part of their mission.
Yeah.
And then you've got, the parents think you're going to do something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know some of us have talked about some program requirements. What happens to that? Well, it goes in the file.
Yeah. And I think that I would rather an organization don't do this. Don't go through this. Don't put yourself through this if you're not going to do something, because once you know something, you're obligated to do something.
That's a real, I'm wondering for people who are listening if that feels like a real challenge.
Yeah.
Because we know that we don't make the rules for many of these programs.
Exactly. Exactly.
Can we back up one second? You said something that I think is so useful. You were saying about how you're trying to help the frontline staff understand the context. And then I gave the example of the woman who said, I can't change my baby's diaper because of my sexual abuse history. Some of the, I would imagine that the home visitors, because we've been thinking about this, know the connection. But maybe people who don't have that experience might not even understand why, if you were sexually abused when yourself as a child, you can't change your baby's diaper. Yeah. And even that is something you're helping people start to understand the connection between history and parenting.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I've talked, and that's a really interesting, I'm not going to go off on this, Carol, because, you know, I can get really sidetracked.
I think the listening audience maybe appreciates we both can do that. And have.
But I have been doing a lot of thinking about this idea of, you know, parenting practices that come out of trauma versus parenting practices that come out of culture.
Yep.
Because staff struggle with it.
Yeah.
What is that? What is that? You don't want to spoil your baby. Well, maybe that's a cultural practice. Well, but what I've learned is babies need you to, you know, I mean, so what are they seeing?
Yeah.
So helping them to, I mean, providing opportunity. I can't take any credit for helping anybody really do anything, but providing opportunity to have this conversation, to begin to pull these things apart, because sometimes we confuse parenting. We are looking at a parenting practice that is coming from trauma and we don't even know it, or we've mislabeled it. So that is the kind of, and I don't expect staff to be able to respond to the trauma, but identify, because they have a partnership that is so powerful that if anyone can guide that parent to seeking additional help and support, it's them, it's that staff person.
And you and I know that you're edging into probably the most tense aspect of service providers and home visiting. We have many white, female, majority culture home visitors and many minority female and male people receiving services. And that right there is probably what you just said about the coming from the culture of trauma. That's probably one of the hardest places for the racial and ethnic differences to get, and socioeconomic. You know,
it can get all tangled up.
It gets all tangled up.
Everybody just gets so lost. And the staff leave feeling confused and guilty and, you know, angry. And, you know, it can just get so tangled up.
And parents feel offended.
And angry and don't you come back here no more.
And don't try to teach me your way. And then everyone's
mad. Everyone's upset. Everyone's been traumatized.
Everyone's been re-traumatized. And we just continue this in our culture.
Yes.
It's the hardest thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
you notice you guys were just moving on. but that's one of Sharon's gifts, is she keeps bringing this to the forefront so that it doesn't slip into all of our justifications, rationalizations. Well, you know, poor people have always been poor, and they're, you know, like all that stuff that is kind of in the ether that we fall back on when we get that stuck place.
Yeah, when we get stuck. Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I want to mention a couple things. Women that have that are in shelter, low-income mothers, have another. I mean, we're talking about trauma here. This very high rate of physical and sexual assault over their lifespan. Another data piece. This is from the Wilder research. I wanted to give you all. About 30% of homeless women had their first experience of homelessness as a child. Versus 21% of homeless men. So, in the years that I've been doing this work, you know, I have the gift, the opportunity, the blessing to be able to think about all of this and try to pull things apart and really look at them closely. And so one of the questions I ask myself, and this came to me when in 2009, I think, was, and I've talked in my conversations with Carol and with Ann, so we have a mother, let's say, that was not protected as a child. She did not have the experience of feeling and being protected as a child. And now she is being called on as a parent to protect her children. And she doesn't know what that looks like.
Experience she's never had.
She doesn't know what it looks like.
And not for lack of trying.
Absolutely absolutely not. And it comes out in all kinds of sideways. You know, yelling at the children, get in here, sit down, don't you go out there. I mean, it's all she knows.
And it's efforts to protect.
It's efforts, control. If I can control, then I can protect. And you all know that all of this then has this kind of spiraling impact on a young child's cognitive and social emotional development. But this mother, is working from a place that is really empty. She has no reservoir to call on, to go to.
She has a go-to that her parents had.
Yes.
Or her grandma, or whoever it was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So for me, when I hear the phrase, I'm with my child 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I never leave my child with anybody, to me over time has become a cue or a clue to that the parent lacks that protective shield thing because they don't trust anybody, which means they can't tell the difference between who's trustworthy and who's dangerous. And then when they do, of course, then they have to leave their children because we have to work and we have to go shopping or whatever it is. The choice sometimes makes us, it stuns us. And then you see in stark relief, oh, that's why 24 hours a day, 7 days, because I can't tell.
I can't tell, yeah. And then the other side of that is just handing their children over to anyone. Well, you watch, you know, and it's almost like they've kind of become numb or blind that handing my child over to anyone, I don't always, I'm not a mental health therapist, but I know I'm seeing this and I'm thinking, okay, there's something in here that is coming from that parent's experience. And it can, you know, just handing or letting their kids run the halls. That's one of the things I hear from staff. That one parent, that their children just seem to be everywhere all the time, everybody's house, you know, just the parent has no way of understanding their role as protector and kind of limit setter.
And so what we talk about with home visitors is that the parent is showing us like an x-ray into their early experience. They may tell us, and that's why your statistics to me are so astonishing, is that many of the surveys that have looked at the concordance between early abuse, you know, like what people say, so many people underreport. Because we all say what we know to be true, and if you were told that that's for your own good, then that's just discipline. That's not abuse.
That's not abuse.
But that you have such hefty statistics. You have 37% are saying that they were abused as children. I know that in some of the research that's looking retrospectively, it's lower than that. Some of them where they actually follow families into the future is much, much higher because they see it. So I think that's the part that we always got to keep in our minds. When you see somebody who doesn't know how to set the limits, or the children are running through the halls, it tells us, even though they may. So Betty Carlson uses the phrase show versus tell. I used to use the told story and the untold story, but I like Betty's much better. It's so much more visible, right? So that they tell us how it was, but they show us really how it was. And I know for home visitors it's often very confusing because sometimes we do questionnaires or surveys and people say, well, this, you know, everything was fine, it was pretty good, and meanwhile kids aren't getting fed, people are running through the halls. So to keep that duality in our minds, that people can believe one thing and show us something else.
Absolutely.
And then the home visitor has that challenge of how do I bridge the gap? How do I address what's happening even though the parent is committed to the belief that they're doing something different?
Very good, very good.
And then there we are.
And then there we are. So I'll let Carol take this.
Well, I think the reason that I wanted to just add this piece in is that I know in public health there's been an emphasis on ACEs, and that when we think about some of the challenges that Sharon was just talking about, from the idea that 90% of sheltered and low-income women have experienced sexual abuse and physical abuse, to to bring back to our minds how significant this is for adults functioning, and that so many of the folks that we work with also are physically ill. And thinking about both the parents we work with and the young children into the future, that this correlation between the amount of trauma that they've experienced and the physical illness that they have now makes total sense. It's just another way for us to be thinking about ways to get services online, what we really need for protecting the next generation, and helping the parents that we work with understand this, that this is real, that the connection between stress, inflammation, and physical illness is not a fabrication, right? It's just real.
It's real.
And people sometimes get very, I'm not sure if offended is the right word, but the idea that their physical illness has been caused by something that they might call emotional or mental. No one is saying that it's made up.
Right.
There is a direct correlation between the stress you experience in early childhood and the physical illness that you have in adulthood.
Yeah, absolutely.
So another aspect to think about is some of the data that we were looking at is the impact on the children's daily functioning, that you get this, like, in a way it's like the in-between between the early childhood and then the adult ACEs stuff, what you see in the middle. So you see that they are twice as likely to be sick as kids who are housed. They have, and I'm guessing this is an underreporting again because these are only people that are showing up, right?
Right.
You know, twice the amount of ear infections. Can we talk about asthma a little bit? How often we see that in children who are homeless or in...
It is a very high rate.
Very high rate.
It has a very high rate in homeless children.
You know, here it says it's 4 times the rate of asthma. Again, I'm thinking that that's based on who is actually showing up.
Yeah.
But we also see it in terms of some of the hypotheses is that it's related to animal droppings. It's that it's an allergy that it somehow exacerbates the asthmatic reaction. Cockroaches, I've heard.
That's what I've heard too. Another what I've seen in my work is eczema. It's a very high rate of eczema among children, young children who are in supportive housing.
So the stress-related physical, right? We don't cause our own eczema, but it's certainly exacerbated by the stress response. And then we've got things like double the rate of learning disabilities and 3 times the rate of emotional and behavior problems. So just thinking, we've talked quite a bit in other webinars or presentations about when the brain is developing under stress, that the stress response part of the brain gets more highly wired and more highly activated, and it's necessary if you're looking out for your survival, but it's at the cost of the development of the prefrontal cortex and the abstract thinking. And so many of these kids who are on high alert for survival purposes end up testing as learning disabled. And then another thing that I'm guessing you hear all the time in shelters like I do about the rate of ADHD.
Oh gosh, yes.
Right. So one thing for us to think about, in the younger children, we think about the impact of stress on development, and someplace in there that understanding falls off. So maybe by age 6, by grade school, first grade, second grade, all of a sudden it becomes ADHD. It stops being a stress-induced challenge to regulation and becomes an organic. And the problem is that the brain does wire over time, as we just said about the high wiring in the stress response system and at the cost of the prefrontal cortex. But is it organic? Is it biology? Is it environment? Is it experience? So for us all to keep in mind, because for many home visitors, they're seeing young children, but they're also older kids as well, that the older kids are the outcome data of the younger kids. And the parents are the outcome data of the older kids, right? It's all one.
It is.
Continuum.
And what I find to be interesting, I'd be curious to hear from the audience too, is when you're working with the family, that your primary kind of focused is the young children, the parent-child relationship, and there are older children in the household. The parent, if they are in a place where they can kind of think outside of survival, they begin to think about how what they're learning about their young children can be used in their relationship with their older children. They begin to make this connection between, like if you talk about the impact of high stress, trauma on children's development, I actually see parents have an aha moment. Oh, is that what happened? And then they begin, as they begin to develop strategies to work to engage and be in relationship with their young children, they begin to think about how that can help them in their relationship with their older children. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear.
It's a really great point. I think we also see, and again, for people who are working with homeless families, you may experience both of these, what Sharon just said about people who get that aha, and people who say, well, I protect my children from stress. So that doesn't, so I know for me doing parent group in the homeless shelter, I would sometimes get one group that was exactly as Sharon just described, where they're like, oh, well, that must have been what happened to me because I was homeless as a kid and I just couldn't learn, and another group where the idea that they have not protected their children from stress is too threatening.
It's too much.
And like all of us could understand that. Like as a parent, to feel that your child somehow has been impacted by your adult life is too much.
Right.
So I think we hold both of those possibilities.
So true, Carol. That is so true. I don't know about you all, but what that makes me think of is how often I hear from parents, well, my parents did so and so and so and so, or I went through so and so and so, and I came out okay.
We actually, right, you guys listening, we laugh about that a lot. Laugh in a kind way, not at somebody, but it might happen while someone's sitting in jail.
Yes, exactly.
I turned out okay.
But I turned out okay.
Right, and so that's the defensive system we all need.
Yeah.
Our coping strategy system.
Right.
Because to feel that your parents did it wrong is a really hard place to be.
That's right. And to feel that what I'm doing for my children isn't okay is too much for me to handle.
Too much. And as all of us know, if somebody came into our lives to tell us what we were doing is wrong, how hard that would be.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we try to think about these things all the time.
Right.
But we also know, as we're talking, that when it's homeless kids, that urgency to do something as a home visitor is much higher.
Yeah.
Because it's right now, it's incredibly important, and this is a long-term thing.
Yeah.
The urgency is ours.
Yes.
And we have to kind of manage that.
Yeah, that's so true.
This is the family's life.
Yeah, that's so true.
And so again, we go back to, you guys who are listening, regularity, consistency, the collaborative stance. I mean, these things that, and the reason I'm saying that is that I know everybody says, well, when do we get to the what do? We do the same thing. We do the same thing.
I cannot tell you, based on the information, let me see where we are. So this is a good time for me to start talking about I did a research project in 2009, I think. So first of all, I want to, the research that I have used over the years, I wanted to give you an idea of where this, some of this information can be found. The Infant Toddlers Discovery Project I did in 2009 when I was working for an organization that was part of the Family Housing Fund called the Family Supportive Housing Center. So really quickly, the research I was able to, with help from others, from evaluation and research consultant and another person who did help with the interviewing, we were able to interview staff from 23 sites, 23 supportive housing organizations, the 17 organizations, but a couple of them had more than one site. Five offer both sites. Oh, okay. So this is just a little information about the organization.
Oh.
Five offer both site-based and scattered site housing. Parents of children. We talked to parents of children whose children, they had children 0 through 4 years old that were living in supportive housing. 185 out of 395 eligible families participated, which is a fairly high rate, response rate. And I'm going to give you some ideas of the things that I learned from this research. Key learnings. Mothers' experience with pregnancy, when we asked them about, how they felt during their pregnancy, how, that just kind of getting them to talk to us, things we heard about were despair, disappointment, fear. They were fearful, not, how my aunt or my mom was going to respond. That was part of their fear. Their fear was also, oh my God, what am I going to do? Mm-hmm. Worry, shock, disbelief, and the least thing we heard was happiness.
The least. Yeah. And would you say that all of these pregnancies were unplanned, or most of them were unplanned?
I would say 99.9% of them were unplanned.
Okay, here we go.
And so, again, this gives us a glimpse into the mental state that the parent starts in at conception now.
And also that really helps us, that folk tale about when you worry, you affect the development of your baby, and people kind of would poo-poo that for years and years until it became clear that your stress hormones affect the developing fetus.
That's right. And so this is case in point. Exactly. This is very important. One of the things I wanted to learn about in the research, so we asked about, tried to get an idea of the support systems, social support systems that the parents have. What I learned was, in many cases, these parents had very weak or no social support systems. Mm-hmm. They would identify their caseworker, caseworker, I think is the title they used most often, another nonprofit organization as part of their social support system.
It's interesting. A lot of home visitors experience this dual reaction when they find out that the family they're working with put them down as the emergency contact. And in one hand, it's kind of evidence of how important you are, but on the other hand, does that mean that you're then in their personal life?
Yeah.
And that tension of wanting to be a relational provider, and yet feeling like, did we cross a boundary, or what am I going to do if the person goes into labor and calls me? Am I the person who's supposed to show up? So we know that when you don't have any support systems, I heard in a consultation recently where the service provider had been involved for only 2 weeks, and the person identified her as the most important person in her system.
I heard that. I mean, my research confirms that. Confirms that the relationship that they have with you all, the home visitor, or it could be the caseworker that's in the supportive housing, these relationships become so powerful in the lives of the adult.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, and I do want to say, so years ago I was working in a parent drop-in that was down the street from the homeless shelter, and a homeless family came. The child was about 5, and he came, and I have an old Fisher-Price dollhouse that I've been carrying around for years and years. So he was playing with the dollhouse. I think they came twice, and then they left, and they were gone for a year. They came back after a year, and the child saw the dollhouse, and he said, I remember playing with this.
Wow.
And to me, that was, again, one of the, sometimes we need those concrete reminders of the way these experiences that feel single, random, they get into the system of you are one of the people that has been a port of solace or a place for resting, that I can connect to other people who were that for me.
Right.
And keep that hope alive that there are people there that can help.
That's right. And I know what that feels like. I had that. I know what that one time, or those two, I know what that feels. Whether the child is able to, not the words don't come out of their mouth, but they have it in their body. Mm-hmm. I know what it feels like to feel safe.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And what Bowlby or other people call the felt experience. That we can talk about it, but until your body feels it, it's a completely different experience.
So a couple of reasons why there's such weak social support systems in these families in supportive housing, they made choices. They made very difficult choices to kind of sever relationships with others. One, they wanted to live sober, or they had to live sober. Whatever it is, whatever got you there, that's okay. They were making a choice to live a sober life.
And what we know is sometimes that means cutting off family.
Yeah, exactly.
Like going
family
to
and friends.
uncle's house,
That's
where
right.
they became.
Yeah, they can't do that anymore.
Yep.
Fleeing domestic violence. They had to cut off relationships, not only with that individual that was perpetrating the violence, but their family members, their friends. So so these are some of the things that were identified as, why they don't have the relationships, the connections anymore.
And I think that's something that a lot of home visitors experience when they talk to people about why they're here, and we hear that many people are coming from other states.
Yeah.
And they come and they move into a homeless shelter, which is hard for somebody who was fortunate enough to be parented typically to imagine that you would move to another state without a place to go.
Right, right.
But when you're leaving everything that was dangerous, the default of a homeless shelter may feel more safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We also asked about help after childbirth because we wanted to get an idea. We're trying to get a sense of connectedness, how they learned how to parent, just get general impressions through this research. And 1/3 said they received family support after the baby was born. Another third had no family support, and these mothers were likely to have been left alone after childbirth. So these are still examples of social isolation.
Yeah.
And immediately after childbirth. That, again, we know that social isolation, the time before the time we can have with a parent that is with a new baby, we can really have an impact. That's what you all do. The home visitor, that if I can get that parent in those, at pregnancy or right at birth, shortly after birth, that's when I can have the most impact on the family. These moms are telling us, I was alone.
So are you saying that if people can keep in mind that the reason they have possible reason that they have no support system is because they made a choice toward health?
Yes.
That perhaps we wouldn't feel quite as devastated or quite as sometimes judgmental.
Yeah.
Or like they're the other. Like who doesn't have anybody?
Right.
But that sometimes people have decided, I don't want to live like that, or I don't want my children to live like that, and that maybe there's more of a neutral or even positive space that we as service providers can hold as, okay, this is kind of a starting over.
Yes, absolutely.
Knowing that the pull to go back is very strong.
It's very strong. I was just going to say that, Carol, and in that, they might slip into behaviors that they're trying to undo.
Yeah. We might even say they will.
They will.
Slip into behavior.
Yes.
And the difference is that they've enlisted someone to help them think about it.
Yeah.
So when they do, we say, oh, isn't that what you had told me about before?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the response is likely to be, yes, but this is different this time.
Yes. And so the home visitor, the caseworker, whoever it is, becomes the sober coach, becomes the parenting coach, becomes you kind of fill in the blank.
Fill in the blank. And the other piece you keep saying, I think that it's helpful for everybody to hear, is that this is helping parents with what they want to do.
Yes.
This is kind of where people feel a conflict sometimes between like the program model that they're working with, or if they have a curriculum they're working with.
Yeah.
And you're really being clear that for parents who have had this much trauma and this much stress, getting to where they want to be, which is sometimes not very programmed. It's, will somebody listen?
Yeah.
Maybe help me remember how I want it to be.
Yeah. Because you can't, I'm going to be done after this, you guys, but what I've learned is you can't get to the child, okay, I'm telling you something you already know. You can't.
It's always helpful to say. Always helpful.
You can't get to the child without going through the parent. The parents, parents feel like, if you don't care about me, you don't care about my child. They just, we can't focus on them, but the ability to support that child in that household requires me to become connected to that adult.
And as we say, the first rule of home visiting is to be invited back.
Yes. And you'll only be invited back if that parent feels like, okay,
there's somebody who's going to listen.
There's somebody who's going to listen.
Yeah. And someone who has the possibility of understanding me and my world.
And then, and the gift that you all have is being able to see where we can help that parent connect their experience to their child.
What do you think, though, about people who are so different from the families they're visiting? They've never been homeless. They've never come from a high-stress neighborhood. They've never experienced violence. Do you think, I don't want to set you up in asking a question, but how do you think people can convey that they are open to hearing?
I think that what I have watched staff in supportive housing do with families, because it's predominantly, young white women out of college that come with such passion and just, they're just so open and so ready to be helpful.
Yeah, earnest.
They're earnest.
Yeah.
And so,
and we don't mean that in any pejorative way.
No,
anybody listening,
no, I'm saying that.
So they're great characteristics.
That's why I want to say that, because those are the great characteristics.
Yeah.
They're not coming with judgment.
Yeah.
Their education has kind of beat that out of them for a while. Don't take your judgment.
Yeah.
Let go of that. And so what I see, when I see those that are having success, it's those that are willing to listen, to stay there, to be consistent, that, to be the one that comes back.
And our tension is always around also not colluding.
Oh, absolutely.
So when we experience that mixed up, aggressive, hostile feeling, to figure out how to say, is this the thing that happens?
Yeah.
And is this the thing you wanted help with?
Yes. Yes.
So that it becomes back to what people are looking for.
Yeah.
And rather than what things that we think they should have.
Right.
Yeah.
I will say this last thing, Carol, then I'll be done.
No, you don't have to. I think she's looking at the time, you guys. We have a lot of slides.
And one of the things that I know, the organizations that have opportunity for reflection for staff and support are the ones that have, they have less burnout. They have more effective service delivery strategies. When the staff is left kind of unto themselves, they have to figure it out. That's a recipe for disaster, because now we got two people feeling victimized.
Right, exactly. Yep.
So that would be the
too activating. The work is too activating to be on your own.
Oh gosh, yes.
So okay, so we realize there's only about 15 minutes, so we want to kind of get to the idea about priorities in designing programs. That there are a couple of things that both Sharon and I have talked about and have noticed in the programs that are serving homeless families that we want to think about, and this is part of the research that's going on across the country as well. So there are two aspects that we're going to address. One is this idea about straining a stressed system. So this research is kind of under the rubric of the psychology of scarcity or bandwidth, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. That's one of the terms. And the other is that if we're working with traumatized families, our system has to figure out how to not re-traumatize families. So there are some programs that, again, they're educational and supportive, not from a mental health perspective, but sometimes they encourage families to use each other for child care. And when you're asking parents who have gone through so much trauma and so much stress to trust someone whose maybe their parenting practices have been observed by that parent as being dangerous or frightening or neglectful, and then the system says, but why don't you trust that person? It kind of, so we got to be thinking on a systems level, but about that internal traumatic processing that is sometimes being asked to override.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That sentence was all screwed up, but you seem to know what I meant.
I get it. Yes.
Okay, so currently there's this term bandwidth that's been used to describe the difference between the strain that's going on and how much resource we have to deal with it. So it's used in the business world also. I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing about the idea that the mental energy that you need to deal with something increases with the stress that you have, but you may not have that available. And so in the business world, they talk about, don't overexpand too quickly to outstrip your bandwidth. If you have too many ventures going on, but you have only this amount of mental capacity or financial capital, it'll stress your system. And the idea of, spend it wisely, spend the mental energy that you have wisely. So just thinking about how much bandwidth it takes families to do basic survival stuff. Figuring out how to purchase food, where to purchase food, how to get from the shelter, like what Sharon was describing about you're in a church and then you're supposed to be out by 6 and then there's a bus, but if you miss the bus then you have to take public transportation and you've got your children, you've got all your belongings, you have maybe $2 because the shelter is also holding your money, which we had talked about in our last session about what happens in the shelter. How much of that is using up the bandwidth that we also ask people to do to plan for what they're going to do next.
Right.
So sometimes we think about, and I know that as home visitors feel, compelled to take people places, reduce the stress. Sometimes, and this is just among us, right? We're not just among us. Sometimes against what the program rules are. But when you're faced with people who are struggling with 2 or 3 children, car seats, they don't have diapers, and they say, well, we're going to wait for the bus, and you've got a car that's empty. It's really hard to follow the program rules sometimes.
Right.
Even though we know why the rules exist, but the home visitors' pull is to try to reduce the stress so that people have more bandwidth available to plan for the future. So there's a lovely book called Scarcity, Why Having So Little Means So Much, and the idea that, we should be thinking about this in how we design programs, but rather it's sometimes the opposite, that programs sometimes have built into them, but that's actually the next, built into them, like if they are really serious, they'll do these things. And so it actually increases.
Re-traumatization.
Well, there's the re-traumatization, right. So we want to be thinking about both of these aspects, how much the program requirements are taking up, and is it going to set them up for re-traumatization? So the idea that the bandwidth of the poor is treated like a free resource. Well, they've got the time. So they can go downtown, and then they can go to the WIC office, and then they can sign their kid up for school or for child care. So another quote in this book that I really think is really useful is studies that have looked at the effect of stress on, well, they're calling it IQ. We might call it maybe how much resources are available. And that when you have a lot of stress, it has the same impact as staying up all night on your ability to reason and your ability to build up resources that you need. So the quote that I liked is, as if the poor are pulling an all-nighter every day. And we all know, any of us who have pulled all-nighters, which probably, I'm guessing, well, they're nurses, they're very organized, so maybe not as many as people like me.
I've done it.
Yeah, you and me, we know we have. But maybe you guys are more organized. You probably know what it feels like. Especially if you're in finals, you're doing it maybe more than once, and how your capacity diminishes. So the idea that we're asking people to bring more resources to the table when they're in a state of diminished capacity is really challenging. And then this also idea, this lovely quote: "We tunnel on the urgent and forget the important." So one thing that comes up with home visitors a lot is they text somebody, they call them, they say, I'm going to be there in 10 minutes or I'm going to be there in an hour. They get the response, yep, okay, I'll be there. And then when they get there, somebody is there that's going to take them shopping.
Yeah.
Or someone's going to take them to go sign up for housing or something like that. And that's the tunneling on the urgent.
Right, right.
You forget that the home visitor actually has all these forms to sign that's supposed to do this long-term plan because today someone's available to help you with an immediate problem.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So just some of the things to think about from the idea of the psychology of scarcity. And then many of you have participated in both the talks that we did about home visiting in the context of trauma that addressed how the brain is affected. But it's very clear, there's a lot of research that the brain is already, so developmentally, as we know, starts very young, and then by the time they become parents, their brain has been very affected by trauma. So people in need of the most bandwidth have the least available because, and as we said, the trauma is not post. It is ongoing. It's ongoing. So just in terms of thinking about how might we help programs increase bandwidth versus decrease, one is to really talk with people about that the demands to demonstrate commitment might be unreasonable given the state of chronic stress that the brain is in, and that asking people to first do a certain number of things and then they can become part of the program might be counterproductive.
Yeah.
There are some people that are going to be able to do it, right? That we know.
Oh, yeah, definitely, definitely.
And so then, but as all of us know, some programs work for, how do I say this? All programs work for some of the people, right? Given the right distribution of stress and resources, all programs work for some people. There's a certain percentage of people where almost all programs feel ineffective.
Yes, yes.
Homeless families, almost by definition, are going to be in that range.
Absolutely.
So a second one is to keep our interventions simple.
Oh, this is very important.
That when we have too much that we're trying to do in a particular visit. So some of the adult learning studies says we only retain 3 things in a presentation. As an adult learner, when the bandwidth is stressed, I don't know whether we could even do 3. So keeping interventions simple, that the listening to, being with, understanding, that's an intervention, and it increases capacity because it reduces the stress and then frees up the mind to be able to think. So we all know that sequence of a home visit when there's a lot of arousal, and then we listen, and then and then it gets smaller, and then at some point we can be thinking about what the plan might be for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And how that just doesn't work if you do it upside down.
Right. Yeah, right.
And then we also talk about lending our own cognition when the bandwidth, or adding bandwidth when the families are stressed. So when we say, so what will you do if you don't have diapers tomorrow? So what have you done before? How do you think about it? Do you know about these resources? That we kind of join in the thinking. We talk a lot about we're not doing for, we're thinking with, so that people have more capacity to consider what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Okay, then the second, we only have a few minutes. Oh, go, The second,
there might be questions.
There might be questions. So is it okay with you if I just do this?
Sure,
and
absolutely.
Find out I'll try to talk really fast. That the programs sometimes are not, given that they're not trauma-informed in the way that they were set up, are not thinking about preventing re-traumatization. But we know if you've spent any time at a homeless shelter, there is a lot of arousal. There's a lot of language. There's a lot of physical acting out. So children and adults are being exposed to trauma triggers frequently. Somebody is upset, go storming out. And it makes total sense given that you've got people who have relational difficulties because of their trauma history in a small space, competing over few resources. It makes total sense that that would be a high activation level. But for children and adults where the traumas have not been identified, have not been understood, that the triggers are like landmines underneath the surface.
Mm-hmm.
You only know them when you trip over them.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very activating system.
Yeah.
So thinking with a program about how to minimize the amount of activation might be really helpful. Also, time of day.
Yeah.
That after school time of day when parents are tired and the children are really highly aroused and everybody's and
Yeah.
before food, those are really challenging times.
Very challenging time.
We also know that developmentally, when trauma is ongoing, children develop mental health disorders that get diagnosed, but they're not attributed to trauma.
Yeah.
So the interventions sometimes exacerbate because they are perhaps more focused on the behavior, which is experienced as the child as confrontational.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's masked, then it might be that the children are actually being activated rather than helped by the kind of intervention.
Right.
And then as Sharon was saying, that the protective shield of the parent maybe doesn't exist. Maybe it can only exist when there's enough bandwidth,
mm-hmm.
and that one of the things that falters when the bandwidth is played out is that the protective shield also falters. We see a lot of times that parents can't retain their placement because they can't make the expectations. To me, it doesn't mean that we want to necessarily change those, but we want to put in supports around, like we do with young children in preschool, we say, if you don't remember the rules, I'll help you.
Yeah.
To put in supports so that they don't lose their placement. It's been an interesting thing to think about, say, a shelter that's designed for youth versus a shelter that's designed for parents.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the parents are youth, in many cases the shelters for youth have lower expectations than the shelters for parents, even though they're the same age range.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting one.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Policies that challenge boundaries. Boundaries are already challenged, so we know that that's going to be a problem. Uh-oh, is it time to end? I just heard that little click from Michael.
No, actually, you guys haven't. You guys have until 10:30.
Oh, we've been rushing through that.
Oh, thank you for reminding. Are there any questions, Michael?
No, we have no questions right now.
Oh, okay.
So you can take your time,
Okay,
and you have another half hour.
Sorry, you guys. We're feeling quite embarrassed. We didn't realize that because we were here at 8 and we knew it was 2 hours.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. We should have known. Sorry. I apologize for that.
Where are we?
So thinking about preventing re-traumatization, thinking about how to help staff even know that it's an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that's something you've been working on. Do you feel that people are receptive to that?
I feel that the staff are very receptive to it. The staff are looking for any insight and tools that they can use with families. Since we do have a little more time, I'd like to go back a little bit.
All right.
I had some thoughts about, when we're talking about, so we're in these slides, we're really thinking about strategies. I think you're kind of practice. What can I do? And so we know that, one, like these families often have limited bandwidth. You know, their focus is elsewhere. It's not only, it's on their survival, it's on food safety and housing, but their bandwidth is also being used up by some some generational stuff that's happened for them. So they're really, they've got a lot, they're calling on their internal resources in ways that they just don't have the capacity for. And I think sometimes helping them, and then also we want them to plan, plan for the next thing, that our next meeting, or, and we might want them to do something so they have, quote unquote, some homework, or, that is so out of, I have learned. I say this because I've learned, not because This is not theoretical. This is experience. That is a lose-lose.
So Andrea talked about that when she came to do, she was the homeless home visitor from Head Start, about that planning has to take place only when the parent has the idea about the future, and that you come and work on the bandwidth issue, really, like reducing the stressful parts of life, and then when the parent is able to think about that there will be a next meeting.
Yes.
Because for a long time it's just, this is the meeting. This is the meeting today.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
She talked about that.
Yeah, yeah. So,
which we have to point out is against what many programs are asking.
And that just, I mean, that's the, I'm having an aha moment myself, you guys. But that's the break between what really is needed and what programs think is needed.
And possibly, I'm wondering if the home visitors are thinking the same thing, that the program planners think that if you do a plan, it helps people organize, and maybe you guys have experienced that for some people it is helpful. Many people tell me they make a plan and that it doesn't relate at all to what happens next. But at some point in the relationship, a plan becomes viable.
Right.
I know in Head Start they're supposed to do a family plan from the very beginning.
Right.
I know for other, I'm not sure for Healthy Families how early it is that people start doing goals. I think they do.
Okay.
Yeah, and Early Childhood Special Ed.
Yeah.
They do goals. There's a lot of that embedded, which for some families may be helpful.
It works. I think by families that get into supportive housing, the organization that I worked with created with the providers created this strategy called the 90-day window. And within the first 90 days of being in the housing, there are these kind of things the organization does with the family, which then gives them data that can help them then create a plan.
So do you have an idea for the home visitors where the program is requiring them to make a plan about the kind of things that could be helpful to the family? So the ideas are supposed to come from the family.
The idea is that you're taking the first 90 days to get a better kind of awareness of what the family needs. Because at one point, supportive housing was families were coming into housing that were bringing significant mental health issues. These organizations were not designed to serve adults with significant mental health needs. And so the organizations had to kind of figure out, okay, what do we do, what do we do, what do we do? So they created this strategy called the 90-day window. So one, it gives them an opportunity that the organization has to have a plan to assess the mental health needs. So get their records, find out, find history, blah, 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 medication, find out what medications they're on. I mean, that was not what they were designed to do.
Yeah.
They had to get an idea of, other needs, were the children separated at any point? Did the parents lose the children? Who else in the family? Is there drug problems? All kinds of stuff. And then they develop a plan that is responsive to what they know are the most important needs of that family. So, for an example.
So you're saying it's not generated by the family?
It's not generated by the family. No, it is generated by it's created by the staff on behalf of the family.
So for programs though where they're supposed to get the family to generate their own goals.
Okay.
Do you have an idea from your research about that this is actually asking them to do something that they're really not prepared to do yet? A way that the home visitors could help embed some of these ideas that the supportive housing people discovered so that the goals they come up with feel more related to what people actually need to do or what the home visitors really see. Like sometimes people will say, well, I need to get a job. And the home visitor might be going, wow, first you got to get sober, or first we have to find a way for you to not fight with everybody. So that disconnect between the program demands that it be generated by the.
I understand.
Yeah, and I'm hoping you guys, as you're listening, I don't know if you're thinking, well, it works fine with us. I mean, it's not an issue. I don't know. I only know from the people that I talk to that sometimes it's an issue, and as you're saying from your research.
Right, right. So the one thing I can tell you I've learned is that one thing that it can't be no more than 3 things. You know, you want the family to, and you kind of have to get. You understand what their goals are based on their conversation. They're not able oftentimes to say, they're able to say, I want a job, I want to get a job. But they don't know, and that's all. That's all. You know, it's not, I want a job at McDonald's, it's not, you know, I want a job. But but what is that really telling you? You know, that's saying a lot right there. You know, you want to become independent. You want to feel more independent. What will the job provide for you? What does a job mean? What will it give you? What will it give you and your children?
So you would break it way down.
I would break it down.
Hey! Ooh. Okay, so you guys might be hearing something. All of a sudden, Sharon's computer started to play something. We don't know. Michael, could you come please and help us?
Gotta love that go-to.
And I didn't touch anything. I swear to you, I was looking right at Carol. I didn't touch anything.
So you guys, we just have to apologize. We realize there have been a lot of snafus today, technology and also our understanding of it.
Yeah. So, yes, I would definitely break it down.
Do you have a sound thing?
That's what I'm wondering if there's a sound thing. Oh, it stopped.
Okay.
So I would break it down. I would, you know, that's the being with, you know, kind of, and being, you know, the translator, or I can't think of a better word, and really try and glean from that family and get to the core of things if you can, and then keep it really, really simple. 1, it stopped.
It stopped. We don't know what it was.
1, 2, or 3 things at the most. Some families can't even handle 3 things. But have 1, 2, or 3 goals at the most that they're going to work toward, and then you go from there. But they can. What I've experienced, and I do some parenting. So, and I just finished a 14-week parenting program. I use incredible years with families, and so I'm really kind of thinking about these families that I've spent the last 14 weeks with, and how they'll start in one place with me, and when we begin to really break it down, they're able to see what A has to do with B has to do with C. They're able to kind of start to make those connections. But you have to start at a very, very basic fundamental place with them. So they can say, I want a job, but there's a whole lot of other stuff underneath that. A lot of stuff underneath that. Just, well, what has been your experience? Where have you worked before? Did you like it? Did you get along with, you know? I can't really tell you, but there's a whole lot more underneath all this stuff. And getting at the core and keeping it simple for them is I think is your only opportunity for real success. Losing contact with these families, I can imagine, Carol, that's one of the challenges for home visitors when they're working with families that are homeless. Is, you know, if they're in supportive housing, you got them. You got them for a length of time. They can also disappear from supportive housing, but you got a little stability there. But when they're in shelter or they're sleeping in a car, that's a whole different.
Well, and this is what Andrea had talked about. That making yourself useful. And how to do that in a way that is felt. I mean, that's I think where we run into the problem between ideas and then the actual experience. Is that as a person who hasn't experienced homelessness, doesn't come from a history of trauma, how do you make yourself available in a way that a person who has those things feels understood? And when someone feels, and what Andrea talked about was the testing, that you can make yourself useful, you can be consistent and reliable, and you will be tested.
Yeah.
You can do all that. You will be tested all the way through. She kept talking about the testing, that even when you're let in, even when people are starting to call you when they need something, you will be tested.
Yes.
And the testing, because of the history of trauma, that
Yeah.
has really disrupted their capacity to settle comfortably into relationship with somebody.
Mm-hmm. And what I've learned is something that many of you probably already know, or if there's those of you that have adult children, you know this. One, pick your battles carefully. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you all know that. I don't even have to say that to you. Pick your battles carefully, and don't bite. The bait, they're going to,
There's a lot of bait.
There's a lot of bait.
Yeah.
Don't bite. Because that's the experience of relationship is antagonistic.
Uh-huh. That's such a great phrase. So I'm hoping you guys, you should see her face when she's saying this, that there's a lot of bait. Can we just say for people who maybe are newer what we mean by that? Because I think we both know, but let's say what we mean by it.
So the parent that says to you, well, I know, okay, let's say my parents with me and blah, 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 and I turned out okay. Mm-hmm. That's bait.
That is bait. How about I've raised 4 children, and so I know exactly what I'm doing.
Exactly.
And the children were removed when they were all under 3.
Yeah, bait. Yeah.
Where you want to jump in to say, where? But
exactly.
And then that will disrupt.
And that will, so now you've got derailed. And that's what they're used to, people judging them.
Yep.
You don't have your kids. How you know?
Yeah, exactly.
They're used to people that's the engagement.
That's exactly right. Right. So if we're thinking about people who come from disrupted relationship, the engagement is around the antagonistic stuff.
Yeah.
Because engaging around something else hasn't been available to them.
Right. And so on the one hand, don't bite. Don't take the bait. On the other hand, there are some things that are so obvious that you can't ignore them. Right. So that's, that's like but they're not offering it. It's just, you see it. It's so clear that you can't ignore it. And that's the place where your expertise is so important, is how do I address that thing I just saw? Mm-hmm. Like telling the 3-year-old, get up on that couch and sit down. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not, we know that that's not really how we want to see this mother interact with her 3-year-old. I've seen it. I can't act like it didn't happen. And that's pretty mild.
Mm-hmm. Right. Or I'm going to whip you. Or I'm
part of the sentence. Sit up on that couch and shut up before I whip your butt.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. But I can't ignore it. So, but then the question is, but how do I get there with them in this moment in time, without creating? There it goes again. Yeah. Without creating a big, re-traumatization mess.
Right. So one thing I might think about is that that's a test. So there's a lot of things I think about. One is that parent is just showing us how it was for her. Yeah. Right? That's not a decision. Mm-hmm. That's not a decision to be abusive. And some people have actually done that in front of me to show me they know how to parent. Yeah. Someone has told me, I pop her hands to make sure that she does. That is a demonstration of, here is my way of parenting.
So
I don't take that as bait. I let that go, and I address you really wanted to help your child learn how to do things.
Yeah.
We can come back to ways that children learn at different times. But as you said, there are some things that we can't ignore, and at risk of becoming a party to abuse.
That's right. Exactly.
And so figuring out how to say, so is this how it goes? Is this an example of what it's like? Is that why you wanted to be in the program?
Right.
Did you want to think about doing that differently? What brought you in the program?
Yeah.
So that it comes back to, that's right. That's right. This was but the test is, are you going to tell me what to do, judge me, get angry at me, abandon me? I mean, that's, we know. We don't know which test.
Yeah.
We just know that's one of those moments.
That's right.
And so what do you think in terms of, when you talk to staff, because they're watching it all the time, those that are right on the floor, right?
They are.
About what they let go and what they pick up on.
Yeah. Well, I hear it. I try to listen to staff and provide a lot of opportunities to give them support. So it's me, if I can be supportive, I'm very happy to do that. Providing them training opportunities, for them to be able to have opportunity to just really focus on a topic and think about how they can use that information in their interaction with families and things like that. But what I try to do is have this kind of conversation with them,
Like one-on-one, or do you do it in a group? Or
I do it mainly in a group.
Yeah. So that would be like a
consultation
or
something. Yeah, it's something like that, where they just get to talk about. And then bringing resources to them. So right now I have a project called the Children's Mental Health Project. I won't go into all that, and it's really an opportunity to see for not only the parents to have immediate access to mental health provider to provide children's mental health services to their very young children, but it's also an opportunity for the adults in relationship around that child, meaning the staff and the parent, to have support around supporting them.
So in a way, you're talking about increasing the bandwidth of the providers.
Yes.
So the other piece I think that you're saying is because you talk directly with staff to help them manage that arousal that they feel, to sort out which things you pick up on, which things you let go. They both might be arousing.
Yeah.
So you watch a little thing and you're like, especially if you have it in your own history.
Yeah.
If someone's just ignoring a kid who's saying, mommy, 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 if that's something that triggers you, even though you may decide to let that go, you may still have the eternal reaction.
Yes, yes. And then I find myself trying to model for, this is the teacher in me, but I try and model for staff what they can model for their children,
for the parents, so the parents can model
for their children.
Yeah.
And I don't do it in this. The staff know that. I mean, I'm not trying to pull one over.
Yeah, you're just out front.
So for them to see how can you do that? The hard stuff. Most of the stuff because of the relationship that the staff, such as yourself, the power of the relationship that you have with parents, they often can deal with the obvious.
The other piece I think that you've mentioned to me before, and I know we both witnessed in shelters, is that they sometimes fall back on rules.
Yeah.
Because they get so uncomfortable with some of the issues.
Yeah.
And so they get officious. And they get, well, this isn't allowed, and then of course the parent feels disrespected and not understood.
Yes. Yes.
So trying to, your presence to help them process that thing that gets, where they slip through rules so that they can go back to, let's think about what it's like to be that individual and how we can help him or her do it differently.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So maybe if we just go back to this preventing re-traumatization slide, now we're getting that we're going back to these ideas of stability, predictability, reliability. One of the things that happens in shelters is that there's so much unexpected stuff that happens, so many new people, so many changes in schedule, so many transitions, which we know are difficult for everybody, and helping the organization think about its own protective shield, that protecting kids from circumstances that trigger trauma, or protecting, minimizing policies that trigger trauma. One of the things that I'm sure we both observed is that because there's so many changes, when there's changes in staff, sometimes it doesn't even get mentioned.
No.
So a loss of a child care staff, or a loss of a group facilitator or a case manager is so part of the soup.
Yeah.
That and clients will say, oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. But we got to remember it's not okay.
It's not okay.
And that we honor relationships. That it's a real challenge when you bring that up with the staff that has so much change. And they'll say, oh, people are used to it. They know. We talked about it, but this is part of how we re-traumatize inadvertently, is their favorite person has disappeared, or the child's favorite person.
Exactly. And we're modeling something for that parent.
Yeah.
we don't want them to do.
That's right. That's right.
With their children.
We want it to be clear that relationships are important. So that, I think, is a real challenge. So then just thinking about, you talked about how you help the staff manage some of the arousal so they can increase their bandwidth, and we think about that with the home visitors as well.
Yeah.
That if this is our main strategy, lending bandwidth, then our own has to be attended to. And, I know we talk about this stuff, but it doesn't seem to change.
No.
And in some programs that I consult to, what I hear every year is that the administrative demands grow. And so we know that sometimes it feels like the program puts the emphasis on the administrative demands at the expense of the actual work with clients. And that takes up a whole lot of mental energy.
Oh, it does.
Figuring out how to get all of this stuff done, it takes up bandwidth that could be used elsewhere. And I love that phrase from the scarcity book, the urgent will take precedence over the important. So when you get a new directive about how a form is supposed to be filled out, or that there's going to be a review of records, or there's going to be a review of the whole funding program, that takes precedence over the really important work of working with clients every day. So, we come back to the same conclusion each time about to be effective, home visitors have to have a process that keeps them buffered from overwhelming trauma, or else there's a lot of burnout.
Yeah, there's a lot of burnout. And it becomes very unhealthy because it seeps into their relationship with their family.
Yes. Yeah.
Either the family, they become like, they commiserate.
Yeah.
So now they're partners in this, this stuff. Mm-hmm. Or they become more antagonistic towards each other because the staff begins to feel resentful.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not doing anything. I've been coming here all this time, and I'm, and none of that is healthy for anybody.
Right. And again, we always want to be thinking about how do we stay effective.
Yes.
It all makes total sense, but then we stop being effective. And the hard part with this work is that we don't get back very often that evidence of being effective.
Yes.
We're looking at
true.
incremental change. We're looking at, say, a positive moment or a relationship that worked well and then the family moved, and to remain optimistic that if they've had a positive experience with one helper, they may be able to create a positive experience with the next helper. We look for, and that's why, keeping our eye on kind of, relationship, regulation, reflective functioning, even if it's small, it's noticeable.
It is.
And we think, okay, that happened this time.
Yeah.
Maybe next time it will happen again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is the nature of this work.
It is. It really is.
So just to sum up, if we were going to think about program objectives so that we don't deplete bandwidth and re-traumatize. So just keeping program demands simple, making it worth parents' while. If one of the things that we do is we put lots of service providers in for people who have already strained bandwidth.
Yes.
So then they don't show up, or then you come and there's 4 other people there, and you say, why didn't you tell me the OT was coming? It gets very complicated. Mm-hmm. So we've got to figure out how to make it worth parents' while to meet. Like, they have to feel like there's something they get from it, like, oh, I feel better after that person.
Yeah.
Helping them navigate really complex systems. I know for me, being a person who has a home and enough resources and an education, trying to figure out school issues when my kids were in public school, sometimes just I would think, I've been given a lot of privilege. I cannot figure this out.
Yeah.
How do people, or speak another language, or, really complex systems. Helping all of us remember the importance of protection, of having orderly systems that are providing the kind of protection at the age when people, all ages, but especially in early childhood.
Right.
And helping all of us remember the developmental needs and the needs of the staff.
Yes.
And home visitors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then we've got some resources at the end. These are things that either we both have used for our own information or that we think might be helpful for you guys. And then some citations and the next slide of where some of the stuff that we've been talking about today comes from.
Yes.
So, are there any questions, Michael?
We have no questions.
We have no questions. Okay, so we'd like to thank you a whole lot for participating. We hope this was useful and apologize yet again for the technology. We know that it's really irritating for people, especially people who were born like after 1985. Oh, Michael's laughing.
I want to thank you for this opportunity, Carol. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you all that are out there and that are listening. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you about homeless families and homeless children. This makes a big difference.
And then you'll see you also have, if you're interested in having Sharon come and speak, her contact information is on that last slide. And I just want to thank you for being willing to give us all of this information. You've spent your career gathering.
Yeah.
So. Great. All right.